Blog Talk Radio.
Our people are very serious about not being very serious. Meanwhile, white people are very serious about playing hardball against us. And this hardball is called genocide.
Context of white supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another program to share constructive information about racism, what it is, and how it works. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the broadcast. Anyone suffering from excessive heat, I hope it cools down quickly. Stay hydrated. Drink lots of water. Want to hop into today's broadcast. As I say consistently, if you do not find constructive information here at the C.O.W.S, please invest your time and energy elsewhere. We do not want folks wasting time. We want to be working constructively to replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Our guest for today's program was another suggestion from incredible supporter of the C.O.W.S. She has been a long-time listener. I think she began listening pretty much as soon as the program started last year. She has suggested several guests, including today's author who's going to be with us. Our guest for today's program has written several books concerning social justice. The book we're going to be looking at today is Uprooting Racism: How White People Can Work for Racial Justice. He has a website. You can go check that out and see all of the books that he has authored, as well as the book that we're going to cover today. Joining us live from California. Real pleasure to have him on the broadcast, Mr. Paul Kivel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Make sure he's with us on the line here. Mr. Kivel, are you with us?
I'm with you. Good to be here.
Outstanding.
And Kivel is
glad to Outstanding. Thank you. We're glad to have you with us, sir. Always a pleasure to have folks who are willing to share great information with us to help us solve the problem of racism as soon as possible. If you would like to tell our listeners anything about yourself, why you do this work, that would be very helpful.
Well, I came of age in the late 1960s and the end of the Civil Rights era, the anti-war period. I got involved early on in working for racial justice and economic justice, and have tried to figure out a way to lead a life where I can do the education and activism and writing that will help in terms of racism. At least white people realize that we are the problem, that we are the ones that keep the system in place, and we need to step up and do what we can to justify, to rectify the injustice.
I do have a psychology degree. I will point that out. He said justify at first, justify the injustice, but he did correct to rectify the injustice. So right on. I think it would be important. You talk about it in your book. I'm going to make sure to come back to this to highlight this, but I have found that non-white people also have a problem stating the obvious and just being truthful about the world in which we live. If it's acceptable to you, would you mind repeating that? You said that white people are the problem?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that this is a system that's set up to benefit white people. Not all white people the same way, and certainly we have a ruling class in this country that benefits tremendously from racial divisions and racism, and a lot of white people are just barely making it and don't get much benefit from it, but still buy into it. So, and if you look at where decisions are made, whether it's in the corporate headquarters or political offices or boardrooms or think tanks or foundations or universities, you're going to find white people in charge, particularly white men. So it's clear that we're the ones that both benefit and we're the ones that are making the decisions that perpetuate it.
Outstanding. I appreciate that. It's been my experience that a lot of non-white people have a very tough time acknowledging that. Even if I think deep down they know it's true, they have a hard time stating the obvious. We want to hop right into go ahead.
I think that's understandable. And I mean, we all are raised within this system that teaches us that it's natural and inevitable and just normal for white people to be in charge and for people of color to be on the margins. So we all have internalized racism, running through our veins. But that's different than the actual ability to make the decisions to influence the course of our daily lives in our communities.
Excellent point. I think, we definitely all are conditioned, programmed to accept the system of racism, white supremacy, white people and non-white people. I wanted to hop right into uprooting racism, but I begin every program, number one, clarifying you are a white man. Is that correct?
Yes, I am white. I am Jewish, and not well educated because I came through the school system in this country, but I have some education in the formal sense of the word.
Okay. I also want to make sure I point out for folks that are listening, his website is linked in the description for this program. It's paulkivel.com, and that's Kivel, KIVEL.com, paulkivel.com. If you're listening at Blog Talk Radio, you can just click his name, and it'll take you to his website. But this program, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we live in a global system of racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
I think it's pretty accurate. All of this comes out of the consolidation of Christian Europe at the time of the Crusades, and the definition of a white Christian European persona and identity and imperial stance vis-a-vis the rest of the world, and that Christianity had one truth, and that truth was universally good, and the responsibility of Christendom was to spread that truth around the world and enlighten the heathens and the infidels and the heretics. And so our the Western mind and literature and culture and military prowess, everything has been based around this concept of superiority, of supremacy, of manifest destiny and God's blessings on that endeavor.
Wow. Okay. I guess I think it's a good place to start off. Unless I missed it, I'm not sure that you covered this in the book, but I do think this is important. Not more important than simply solving the problem, the nuts and bolts of how to replace white supremacy, but I do think it's important. Do you have a theory or a thought on what exactly motivates white people to harm the individuals that they classify as not white?
I think that's a very complex question. After centuries of white supremacy, for a whole lot of white people, it's just normal everyday behavior and thinking. It's built-in training and privilege and arrogance and superiority. At the same time, there's a lot of white people, white men in particular in positions of power, whose primary object is to consolidate power and wealth. And racism is a very convenient tool for that, just like sexism is and other forms of oppression, because it keeps people divided, competing with each other for the scraps from the master's table and not able to work together to really build broad coalitions for social justice. And then there's the kind of other levels, the interpersonal levels, where white people discriminate on an interpersonal level or carry stereotypes or harass or marginalize people of color. Sometimes that's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. There's a lot of the psychology is, I think, less important than the fact that this is a social, political, and economic system that operates regardless of the intentions of particular white people. So let me just give an example of what I mean. If I'm a teacher in a school, and I'm a white teacher, and I've got a multiracial classroom, and I teach all my students to the best of my ability and treat them well and help them learn and master the material and move on to the next grade, then I don't intend to be racist, and in my particular practice I may not be. But if I'm teaching in a school that tracks children of color into lower tracks than white students, or disciplines students of color more harshly than white students, or has textbooks that don't reflect the contributions of people of color, or there's no teachers of color to be role models for students of color, then these are institutional practices of the education system that I'm in, regardless of my personal intention or goodwill or consciousness or lack of consciousness. So I think we have to look at that institutional level as the important place that keeps things keeps things going.
I agree. As I said before I asked the question, I definitely agree that solving this problem way more important than understanding the why this problem is here in the first place. But specifically with regards to your book, Uprooting Racism, How White People Can Work for Racial Justice, I think this question is a little more important for this matter because I think if whatever is motivating white people, the white people who put a system in place that would be so pervasive that it would become unconscious, white people would carry out the acts needed to refine and maintain the system without even thinking about it. It would just become as normal as breathing. For a system like that to be put in place, there has to be a very strong motivating factor. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because if that motivating factor is stronger than the motivation to practice justice, then white people may not be interested in uprooting racism. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think in that sense, then we have to look at who were the decision makers who set this up, and then we have to go back to the colonial period when, after Bacon's Rebellion in the 1670s, when Africans and European white indentured servants lived together, worked together, and then revolted together, the white ruling class in Virginia got very scared of the power of Africans and whites working together for economic justice. And so they started putting in laws in place that made African indentureship lifetime slavery, and started giving privileges to white people, white indentured servants, so that when they were at the end of their term, they would buy into whiteness. They would buy into supporting this white hierarchy, and so their motivation was very clear. It was money, more wealth. It was to control and to divide and conquer working class people. And I think that that's still true when you look at the higher levels of decision making in this country, that racism is a very useful economic and political tool for the ruling class. When you talk about everyday white people who are kind of carrying out racism, in the everyday ways that we do as apartment owners or storekeepers or teachers or, all those different roles that we play, then I don't know that the psychology is so important, except that we have internalized the system of white supremacy so deeply that we just don't question it, that we end up just colluding passively with passing it on, or maybe in a mean-spirited way pass it on, but we're not in a place to make the decisions that keep the institutions functioning. And so we lose a lot at that level. We're psychologically and practically undermining our own best interests by colluding with this whole system.
I want to hop into the book to kind of share more of that information with our listeners, but I did want to share with the audience. We've had different folks, white and non-white, come through and talk about that, and specifically Jacqueline Batalore, PhD. She shared her thoughts on that. She's a law professor, and she said she has a different take on Bacon's Rebellion, what motivated white people to set up a system of white supremacy in the first place. There are other non-white people who have theories as to why white people are practicing racism, white supremacy. That is not adequate for me, that explanation. I've heard it before. Just to have a system that would take off worldwide, and you don't have the same circumstances that were present in Virginia, in Australia, Europe. This is a worldwide phenomenon just in terms of what would motivate white people, and particularly to coalesce around the idea of being white. Just that's not adequate for me, but I'll leave that for listeners to think for themselves. And I would also say, because this has come up consistently on the program, I do not believe that most white people are clueless about this. It has been my observation, white people are much more informed about racism and white supremacy than non-white people. I think this program has demonstrated that. I don't think it's possible to be a white person and to be clueless about all this. I think you're very informed at some level, and in fact, we'll chat about that as we get into your book. Can you kind of share with our listeners why you wrote this book in the first place? Because it's for white people, uprooting racism, how white people can work for racial justice.
Sure. I've been doing anti-racist work in the community for a while, and trying to figure out how to talk to white people about this and how to get more white people to see what was going on and to step up and take responsibility for challenging racism. And I kept looking around for something to hand people that they could read, kind of a guide, a tool that would be useful for them. And there was nothing there. I kept waiting for somebody else to do it, and then I realized that that's commonly what we do as white people: is we wait for somebody else to step up and challenge racism when we see it around us. And I realized that I had the responsibility to step up and do it to the best of my ability, because waiting around for somebody else to do it was exactly the way that we often avoid taking responsibility for how racism operates in our communities.
One of the early things that jumped out to me in this book, and I've already mentioned it, you said that in writing this book you felt it was important to point out that white people have a problem stating the obvious. I wanted to check first to see if it would be correct to say that stating the obvious means speaking honestly, and if that's correct, why do you think white people have a problem stating the obvious, speaking honestly?
I think it's definitely correct, and I think there's several different reasons why that's true. One is that, most of us as white people have been taught to avoid talking about or even seeing race. Not that we don't, but that talking about it has, had a stigma to it. Most of us are woefully uninformed about the history of this country and the current reality of how race plays out. Most of us are scared. We've been taught that people of color are angry and upset, and so we're scared that we're going to trigger a response and be hurt, even if just verbally or emotionally. And other white people have, when white people have stepped up historically, often they've been isolated and marginalized by white people and called race traitor and, really pushed outside of the community. And so I think that there's several reasons why most of us as white people find it hard to talk honestly and directly about racism. And of course, in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of talk that the civil rights took care of racism. We don't need affirmative action. We're in a post-racial society. There's this kind of popular culture which says that if you raise the issue of race, that means you're being racist just to raise the issue. And I think that's another reason why some white people don't want to start the conversation and describe things how they are, because either they believe or they've been told that that's racist to talk about racism.
Wow. One of the tactics, previous guests, or not tactic, a useful strategy that he shared with me was to restate responses to make sure that you clearly understand what a person said. And I like doing this for my listeners so that they don't miss key points. From what you just shared, it suggested to me, I just want to see if this would be accurate, that some of the reasons that white people have a problem stating the obvious, speaking truthfully, is because speaking about racism, for white people gets codified. So that would be one. You're not supposed to speak directly about race issues. Number two, your response suggested that, or you stated that being a white person, if you start to speak out or work against racism, white supremacy, you can be ostracized, thrown out of the white community. To me, that suggests that if you are a white person, you are supposed to support racism, white supremacy, directly and or indirectly. That the white community would in fact be the racist white supremacist community. And the last thing that your statement suggested was that white people don't want to speak truthfully about racism because they could be perceived as a racist. Those three things that I just shared, would they be accurate? Do they accurately reflect what you said?
Yeah, those are definitely some of the reasons that I see. I think this thing that that you mentioned, the codification is really important because white people speak about racism all the time. Although we just do it in code, we use words and phrases that aren't explicitly referring to race, but implicitly do, and white people know what that means. And so we don't have to speak honestly and directly because there's a whole set of words and phrases and things that communicate it quite well without that.
Wow. Yeah, for folks listening in, there's a whole chunk of the book that addresses this, and he picks out some of the code words that white people use to talk about race. Hopefully we'll be able to touch on a little bit of that as we go. I also felt it was really important. The title of this program reflects your suggestion. The title of this program, Context of White Supremacy. You said that it's very important in doing this work to keep white people, racism, white supremacy center stage. Can you kind of talk about what that means to keep it center stage and why that's important?
Okay. Well, I think one of the ways that racism works is to keep our attention on people of color at the bottom of the economic system as the ones who are the problem, as the ones who are in the way or, causing problems in some way, and not at the white people who are making decisions to perpetuate racism. So in order to deal effectively with racism, we have to look at the people who are doing it, not the people who are receiving it, and that's white people. So every time we find ourselves, especially as white people, focusing on, African American and Latino young men or welfare moms or recent immigrants, or we have to say, okay, what are the problems here? Where are the decisions getting made? Like recent immigration, illegal immigration is a good example because, white people are understandably upset about lack of jobs and jobs being moved overseas and lack of economic opportunity. But clearly, recent immigrants are not the ones who have made the decisions to close down our factories and move jobs overseas. That is white corporate executives and political leaders. So in order to deal with the things that's really the problem in our community, i.e. the lack of jobs, lack of decent paying jobs, we have to look at where the decisions are made that are actually impacting our lives. Otherwise, we get completely distracted and we end up scapegoating groups of people who don't have political and social economic power.
Wow. Excuse me. I think also important, and I hope folks hearing that understand why the title of the program, Context of White Supremacy, really make an effort to kind of keep that focused, keep the focus on white people. You in your book early on, you talk about some of the problems that keep white people from being able to dialogue about and honestly address racism, white supremacy. And one of the things you touched on earlier is that white people will start, and it will be either I'm not a white person, you're in a conference or in a discussion, and all of a sudden all of the white people vanish. I'm not white, I'm Jewish, or I'm not white, I'm Italian or something else. Or I'm white, but I'm not racist. Can you kind of talk about both of those different phenomena?
Right. I think they're unfortunately they're pretty common because there is, because of the gains of and achievements of the civil rights movement. There has been some recognition in the white community that it's bad to be a racist, and that it's an individual problem. And if just white people were not racist, then it would all go away. And so when the conversation turns to racism, the first thing white people want to do is say, well, I'm not really white. I'm gay or a woman or Jewish or, whatever, so that they're not in the hot seat. And really, it's not about being in the hot seat at all. It's about a system looking at the institution and organizational practices. But that's one response is I'm not really white in some way. That kind of I'm really innocent here. And if we can't get around that, then the next thing we say is, well, I'm not racist. I'm colorblind. I treat everybody equal. All of those things that white people say. And that's another way to claim our innocence, basically, to say, I'm really innocent here. It's not my problem. It's not my fault. I do the best I can, so please leave me alone. Let's move on. Let's talk about something else. And, of course, again, it's, there's lots of white people who are colluding with racism, and there's some who are fighting against it. But the system goes on, and we have to look at how the system works rather than getting stuck at, am I innocent or guilty of being a racist? There's obviously things I can do to work better to challenge the status quo, but it's the system, not my personal attitudes, that are under scrutiny.
Excuse me. As I was reading the book, and even as I was listening to your response, when you began, you said that there's this notion that it's bad to be, and I thought you were going to say it's bad to be white. That was what I was expecting, but you said it's bad to be a racist. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's a similar trend that I noted in the book. A lot of what you write and a lot of what you have said, it suggests that to be a white person is to be a racist. I think David Roediger, his scholarship, he says that white identity is racist, white supremacist identity, and I tend to agree with that. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and if that is true, the ramifications of that would be that the system continues because most white people continue to directly, indirectly practice racism, white supremacy, and if that white person, the system would be under scrutiny, it would mean that white people individually would be under scrutiny. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree with you. I think that all of us as white people have play a role in perpetuating racism and keeping the system going. So I don't disagree that that our white identity is caught up with being racist and perpetuating and internalizing that. But at the same time, if I'm in an organization, say like a school or a social service agency or something like that, and I want to get some particular issues of racism in that institution addressed, whether it's the funding or the staffing or the curriculum or whatever, then it's not. I've not found it a very useful tactic to start out by calling white people racist. I find it more useful to identify the institutional problems and then say, okay, what's our responsibility here, and how have we been buying into it, and what do we need to change organizationally and in our individual white attitudes, etc. So it's not to deny the white, individual white responsibility, but that term racist is not a useful strategy to actually address racism going on in concrete situations, in my experience.
Oh, I agree with you. I didn't, when I contacted you about being a guest on the program, I had the same views at that time. I didn't contact you and say, are you a white person? All right, Mr. Racist, come on up. I didn't, I don't think that would have been well received. But I do think it's very important. My program is designed for non-white people. I think it's very important that non-white people understand that this system conditions every white person to function as a practicing racist, white supremacist. You should have a thorough understanding and appreciation for what that means whenever you have contact with a white person. It's been my observation that non-white people are very confused about this, and it's very helpful to have a white person speak honestly with them about this. So that's why I bring it up. Not for folks to just go out willy-nilly and use that as license to just call white people racist every day. I don't see a constructive value to that, but I do think it's very important to understand that's the dynamic in which we live: racism, white supremacy. Does that make sense?
Right, absolutely, and I think it's equally crucial that every white person understands that we are not separate from that system. We're not innocent. We haven't somehow magically been able to completely ignore the entire society, the entire socialization and education and media system, so that we somehow escape from internalizing that sense of superiority and that sense of collusion and support for racism.
Again, the book we're addressing today, Uprooting Racism. Excellent read. I would recommend folks check it out. And also the website, if I could share again, paulkivel.com. It's Kivel, Kivel.com. Wanted to also talk about, I've just found this, I appreciate honesty anytime I can get a white person to speak honestly about the system. You talked in your book on page 13 that, and you've already addressed it to some degree, you talked about how racism, white supremacy had just become something you don't even think about. Previous guest that we had on the program, she said that the default setting is racism, white supremacy for white people. Like you end up practicing and carrying out racist acts without even thinking about it. And you said, this is on page 13, you talked about how in having contact with a non-white person, you said that I try to do this as naturally and smoothly as possible when you see a non-white person and shift to cover your wallet or something of that nature. I try to do this as naturally and smoothly as possible because I wouldn't want anyone to think that I wasn't tolerant. Actually, what I'm surprised at is not that they are there, the non-white person, but that they are there as an equal. All of my opening explanations for their presence will assume they are not equal. They must be a server or delivery person, I tell myself. Can you talk about that and how prevalent thoughts and feelings like that are for white people?
Sure. I think that one of the core things about white supremacy is that there is a natural and inevitable hierarchy with white people on top and people of color below, and it is filled in our textbooks, in our cartoons, in our media, and everything. The message that white people are superior and should be in charge, and people of color are inferior and should be the ones taking care of and responding to white people. And that is really deeply ingrained in us, through all the aspects of our socialization. And so, we may claim that we believe in democracy and equality, and abstractly and intellectually we may, but at a deep emotional level, we've been trained to expect that hierarchy to be in place at all times. And exactly, white people get angry at people of color who step out of that, who challenge that sense that people of color should be in some sense obedient to white people. And so, because we have this abstract belief in democracy and equality, even though that's not our practice, then we have to cover to ourselves the inequality and pretend that we don't see it, or that there's some reason that people are, don't have the same amount of opportunity. So we justify that in various ways, by job categories and education and economic status and things like that, and we try to pretend that everything is involved except race. But it is exactly our expectation of white superiority that maintains that, and is surprised and upset when that breaks down, when we can't, when we have to treat people of color as equals because of their status or education or job position or whatever. That's when white people get the most uncomfortable, the most uneasy, and start really fighting back, resisting the situation.
Wow. Pretty candid. I will share with our listeners, non-white folks, if you're listening in, we've had a lot of white people come on the cows. Mr. Kivel, thumbs up so far. Very, very constructive information, I think. Wow. I hope people really paid attention to that. I think that's extremely important, what Mr. Kivel just shared, that white people, and it goes to the heart of the questions I was asking at the beginning of the program about white people's motivation for doing this. I mean, that's huge, saying that white people, when they see the system of white supremacy in peril, where it looks like they might have to treat a non-white person as an equal, oh man. Now it's now it's on. Now we're going in for direct mistreatment. I mean that really kind of gets at the core of why I was asking those questions. I mean, if white people are really super motivated, super dedicated to maintaining racism, then they're not going to be interested in working for racial justice. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and honestly, a lot of white people aren't. I mean. There's always been whites who have stood up as allies to people of color in struggles for racial justice, in the abolition movement, civil rights movement, and et cetera. But at this time today, the majority of white people in the United States, I think, are first of all, there's deep levels of denial that racism is still a problem or a significant problem. All the polls consistently show that white people think that, in fact, there's mostly equal opportunity in this country, and people of color have it pretty good, and that beyond the denial, there's minimization, there's resistance, there's all kinds of ways to avoid actually confronting the racial hierarchy that we have in our society. So they're not prepared at this point to step up as allies in the struggle for racial justice.
Very important. It's sad, but hey, very important for non-white people to hear that. Just you want an accurate understanding of the world in which you live, and I think that I've come to the same conclusion that white people at this point, they're just not interested in replacing this system. They're dedicated to it. Maybe that'll change at some point, but I'm not holding my breath as a non-white person. That code, and I'm glad that you elaborated on that, because I also think that's real important for non-white people to understand that white people have a very, in my view, very intricate code for how they talk about racism, how they talk around it. It's very subtle. I wanted you to specifically, if you could elaborate on how white people learn this code, how they get the updates, the refinement to the code when new words are submitted, when words are taken out, just how that process works.
Well, I think that, there's just a lot of words and phrases. I mean, when white people talk about the inner city or the ghetto or things like that, or welfare queens or, gangs or just there's a lot of words that in the white vocabulary signify people of color, particular groups of people of color. And so we can have a conversation and be talking in what we can pretend are non-racial terms, and in fact having a very specifically racialized conversation. And one of the things that we have to do as white people is to break that down and challenge that with other white people, because it allows us to completely avoid taking responsibility for what we're saying. In terms of where we learn it, I think we get a lot of it from our families and schools and playmates. And the media is a tremendous disseminator of current white racial racialized vocabulary, particularly, well, not just particularly, but I mean, you can see how words or phrases get racialized very quickly, like the word illegal alien. That is a racialized term. That doesn't refer to the Canadians and British and Germans in this country without documents. It refers to Latin Americans and other people of color who come in without documents. And so that's a word, illegal alien. It sounds like it just describes a legal situation, right? Immigrant without papers. But in fact, it's a very, very highly racialized word or phrase. So that's an example of some of the ways that that gets picked up by right-wing groups, by the mainstream corporate media, and then all of a sudden everybody is using this phrase, illegal alien, even those who might not intend it to be racialized, but it has a deeply racialized meaning.
Wow, very interesting. Very interesting. Do you think that because white people they get this code at a very young age? You said it's past family, the news. Do you think that white people are able to speak in a coded way about race, even with non-white people present, where the non-white people don't know that white people are having a conversation about racism?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for how people of color hear those words or those phrases from white people. I think that, a lot of times white people aren't even aware that they're doing what they're doing. And so they use phrases and words like this in racially mixed groups without an awareness that in fact those are being heard as racial statements, as racist statements. I've definitely seen that happen. So it's a way, and then when they're called on them, they can say, well, I didn't mean that as a racial statement, or I wasn't talking about race. I was talking about immigration. So it's almost like there's a plausible deniability that white people can fall back on very quickly if they're challenged on these phrases and words and the language of racism. And I think that that's one of the reasons that they're there is because since the Civil Rights Movement, it's no longer polite or without risk to talk about racism explicitly. And so white people have had to figure out a whole different way to hold this conversation. It's the same old conversation, but it now has a coded overlay to it.
Racist jokes, I think, is a key aspect of how language around racism, white supremacy gets passed on from generation to generation of white folks. And Joe Fagan, I saw that you cited some of his work. He's been a guest on the program, and he talked extensively about racist jokes. You talk about that in your book as well. I think that is a huge part of the code. I would be extremely grateful. I'm sure you've heard some racist jokes. If you remember any, if you could share those, because I think unpacking the metaphors and words that are used in those jokes is extraordinarily revealing, and I think I highly encourage white people to do that if they can share some of the things that white people say when there are no non-white people present. I think it's extremely constructive. If you can remember some of the racist jokes that you've heard, that would be fantastic.
Well, I'm not very good at remembering jokes, but what I'd like to talk about is how they're used, because I think one of the ways that white supremacy works is for white people to try to control things, to control the space, the environment, the culture, the language. And so one of the things that jokes do is they set a tone and they establish who's in charge, who's superior, and who's vulnerable to being excluded or attacked or abused in some way. And so when somebody tells a racist joke, they're really claiming the space for white supremacy. They're saying, in this space, this is a white supremacist space. I'm going to kind of claim this area, this conference room, or this social gathering, or this fraternity, or whatever the situation is. And so again, it's all coded. It's not going to be real explicit because there's that deniability. Well, it was just a joke, or somebody told it to me, or I didn't mean it like that, or you're too sensitive, or all the things that, when challenged, white people pull back and claim innocence again. And I think that's that tactic of claiming innocence is really a key tactic that white people use. And the joke is, if it's unchallenged, then the claim is made, the claim is set, and it's going to be much harder the next time to challenge that. And it gives permission to other people to tell jokes, but not only to tell jokes, but to start making comments, to be a little bit more explicitly discriminatory in the organization or whatever, to take their feelings out on people of color. All kinds of different ways that joke kind of sets the tone and then creates permission for people to do further acts of racial hostility.
Wow. Are you sure? I mean, it seems like you said you're a white person. I suspect you've heard at least 5 to 10 racist jokes, probably a lot more than that. Are you sure you don't remember any jokes you could share with us?
Nothing that comes to mind. I'm really bad at remembering jokes and things like that. I've of course heard lots of them, but nothing that I can pull up at the moment.
Okay. Dang. I will say I suspect that a lot of spaces, you said this is telling these jokes as kind of a way to mark the territory as claimed racist white supremacist space. I suspect that a lot of spaces get marked as racist white supremacist because these jokes are they're rampant. I'm not even a white person, but I mean, when I talk to white people about this, I get the impression that these jokes are rampant, that when non-white people are not present, these jokes are just being told in great abundance. From your experience, is that true, just your personal experience?
Yeah, I think that it's not just the jokes, but the comments, the coded language, the references, the nods, that there's just lots of different aspects about how that gets it builds in collusion between white people in support of white supremacy. And it just, and what is interesting, and I think Fagan has done a study about this, is that often white people will make comments or tell jokes in white only, or what they think is white only company, that they would never say in public or in mixed racial gatherings. And they would claim at the same time that they are not racist, that they support equality and equal opportunity in public. And then when they think they're in a white-only space, they will make comments and make derogatory jokes and references without any qualms, without any hesitation, without any sense of hypocrisy. And it's been, and this is very, very common. So it's almost like white people know that they have to be on good behavior in many situations when they're in public, and then they go back to their fraternity or their social circles or whatever their their congregation or whatever, and then they can pull it all out and let it go.
Again, our guest, Mr. Paul Kivel, author of Uprooting Racism, How White People Can Work for Racial Justice. Switchboard is getting kind of full. I'm actually going to go to the phone lines a little bit earlier than normal just because folks are dialing in. Maybe they think the information has been constructive. Person who called in from a blocked number with a hand up, your line is open.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, hi. Thank you,
Did you have
Renegade, for the program. I've learned a lot here, and I do have a question for Mr. Kivel. My question is, you mentioned that, and I quote, they go back to their congregations and then they can pull it all out. My question is, do you attend church or any religious service?
Not on a regular basis. I'm Jewish, and I occasionally participate in a synagogue, but not on a regular basis.
Not on. Were you raised up in a Jewish temple or what have you? You participated during childhood?
Again, occasionally, but not very religiously.
Okay. And my last question is, did they ever teach or speak in any codified manner in any time over the rostrum or whatever manner in which they spoke to the members?
Well, yes, definitely. You know, and there was a lot of ambivalence because I was in a Jewish community that was very committed to civil rights and to equality, and at the same time, in the everyday attitudes and practices and the policies of the congregation and things like that, there was a lot of elements of racism involved in that. And I was in a suburban community, and a lot of the Jewish families had left the, quote, inner city, unquote, to be in wider spaces, and were benefiting from various kinds of affirmative action around housing and suburban development and schools. So there were multiple levels of racism that they were participating in, and yet there was also, you know, a sincere effort to support civil rights in the city where I grew up and in the, you know, national policy and things like that.
Okay. And at what age did you discover that it was all wrong to participate in racism? Was it during childhood while you were worshiping with your family, going to the temple, or was it sometime later in life as an adult?
Well, I think it was, there were a couple of events that were really important in my learning about racism. One was when I was 10, our family moved out of a white neighborhood into a more suburban one, and we sold our house to a Japanese American family. And my parents got a lot of hate calls, and the neighborhood was very, very upset that this Japanese American family was going to move in. And that was the first time that I realized that there was something, that there was racism, and that this was part of how it worked. A few years later, when I was in high school, the LA School Board was being challenged around segregation in the school system. And so there were a lot of protests and sit-ins, and some friends took me along to some of those, and I began to see that there was, you know, kind of an institutional system of racism that had actually been, I had been in it in the school system that I had been going to. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't really until college when I left home and left my community and was out in the world more, and there was an anti-war movement, and I began to see the racial implications of us being in Vietnam and the way the lives of the Vietnamese were discarded, and also learned more about the civil rights movement and what some of the issues were in our country and how that connected, that I began to kind of make the connect the dots, so to speak, and to find that I could play a role in challenging that and stepping up and working with other white people and people of color around those issues. So
and one last question, that's good. One last question. Did you ever question any of those racist techniques or implications in the religious arena?
Well, I have done a lot of work in the Jewish community around racism, and I've also done a lot of training and education in Christian congregations and some consulting with Christians, some Christian denominations as well around racism. So, yeah, I've done a fair amount of work in religious communities on this issue.
Fair. Very interesting. We'll get back to that word in a moment. I believe this is Mr. 909. Mr. 909, if you have a question, your line should be open.
Hello?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Oh, thanks, Gus. Paul, I didn't get your last name. What's your last name?
Kivel?
Kivel?
Okay, with a V.
Oh, Kivel. Okay, Mr. Kivel. I know that like the Jewish community, they basically they get like nose jobs, I guess, to look more white. From your understanding, the Jewish and the black community, what's the history? It seems like they've been, as far as the two communities, they've been kind of at odds. Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I think it's complicated. The Jewish community is pretty diverse, and Jews, there's white Jews, European descended Jews, and there's Jews of color in the Jewish community, and there's progressive and anti-racist Jews, and there's very conservative Jews, and there's poor Jews, and there's well-off Jews, and the same thing with, like, say, the African American community. It's a huge community of all kinds of folks and very diverse, and so there's not a relationship between the black community and the Jewish community. There's all kinds of different relationships, and historically that's changed too. But there were some Jews, for instance, in the Civil Rights Movement who stepped up and were really active in the Civil Rights movement. But at the same time, there were lots of Jews that were mainstream, more conservative Jews that were not in favor of civil rights at all. And even today, I think it's very mixed. Some Jews work in the community around racial issues, and other Jews are very satisfied with how things are and are not about to make waves there. Jews have we have a lot of experience of oppression and violence in our past, but that can be taken in different directions. It can be either a motivation for working against racial injustice and other forms of injustice, or it can push people to try to assimilate and play it safe and get their own security and separate themselves from movements for social justice. So there's no generalizations I think I can make around that. I would say, though, that the media tries to play, again, part of how racism works is to keep attention on people who don't have a lot of power. And so keeping blacks and Jews competitive with each other and pitting them against each other is a good way to keep attention away from the corridors of power in this country. And if you look at corporate executives and political leaders and academic and other leaders, cultural leaders, they're primarily white Christian men, and yet, we often have stereotypes of Jews that are controlling everything, and so middle-class white people are taught to fear both Jews, who are supposed to be controlling them, and people of color who are supposed to be going after everything that they've earned. And so both groups are set up as scapegoats for the status quo and for the way things work.
Thank you, 909, and the first caller, the female, who had very good questions as well. Thank you all for participating. Please, this is 818. 818, if you have some questions for Mr. Kivel, your line is open.
Hi, Mr. Kivel. I have both a question and a comment. The question that I wanted to ask you was, in relationships, romantic relationships between a white person and a non-white person, do you think it's possible for the white person to still be a racist or white supremacist? And if so, how have you observed them to practice racism, white supremacy?
Okay, that's another good question. Well, you know, if a white person is in a relationship with a person of color, they don't magically transform into somebody who doesn't have any racist thoughts or any racist history or, you know, any behaviors that or assumptions about racial superiority. So, you know, I can't speak to a whole broad range of relationships between white people and people of color, but it takes a lot of work on the part of a white person to actually be in an equal relationship with a person of color, whether it's an intimate relationship or just a collegial one or just a neighborly one. And so it depends a lot on just what is the motivation and what is the dedication and the the perseverance of that white person, whether they can really make that transition to a real full partnership with a person of color. Now, the other thing that is true of white supremacy, though, is that it also eroticizes and exoticizes people of color, so that for white people there is a tinge of sexualization, of exotic feeling about people of color that also clouds and our perceptions and relationships with people of color, and it's something again that takes real work to get through, to get below, so that those kinds of feelings aren't also part of the relationship, get in the way of the relationship.
And it may be, and I'm not unwilling to critically look at this. It may be just a personal desire on my part to find a kind of soothing lotion so it doesn't feel so painful when it is that you're saying. So I'm not unwilling to look at that.
That Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., founder of the White Privilege Conference, and commenting on sexual relationships with white people being a soothing lotion for victims of racism, white supremacy. I just wanted to hitch that because Mr. Kivel does address this topic in his book. On page 66, he says, not all interracial relationships are based on projections, stereotypes, and symbolic value. But these facets are part of all white people's conceptual baggage and do affect our actual relationships with people of color. Some white people have used people of color to make their sexual lives more exotic, erotic, or thrilling, or to defy white and parental standards. There are residues of these erotic elements in our relationships with people of color, even when we are not sexually involved with them. These residues interfere with our ability to treat them as valued and respected people. Anything you want to add to that, Mr. Kivel?
No, I think that unfortunately sums it up pretty well. So I don't really have anything to add unless other callers want to pursue the topic a little more.
I'll double check with 818. Did you any more? 818?
Well, I did want to ask in particular if he's seen in any black-white couples, or white non-white couples, if you've seen any particular incidences of the white person practicing racism, like any particular examples that you can give us.
Well, I've seen a lot of interracial relationships break up because there were limits to how much the white person could really let go of the racial baggage, and really, lower the barriers to deeper levels of intimacy and vulnerability that were needed in the relationship. So when I talk to people of color who have been in relationships with white people, it's not one thing, it's not one behavior or one attitude. It's just kind of a way of being in the world that as white people we're just so deeply socialized to be in charge, to be a little superior, to be a little condescending.
Racist.
Right. But these are the particular ways that it shows up. So it's that more than any one particular kind of set of behaviors or comments.
Thank you again, Khadijah. Excellent suggestion for a guest. Thank you, Khadijah. I hope you are listening either live or to the archives. And I want to point this out as well. This book, Uprooting Racism, How White People Can Work for Racial Justice, I do think non-white people, if you read this, you can learn quite a bit. It does have excellent information, even though it is, and it says that specifically, it's written for white people. You talk a lot about words. I have a great appreciation for that. Words are very important in dialoguing about racism, white supremacy. One of the words, white privilege, you did not list that as one of the code words. In the book, I didn't pick up any passages where you seem to suggest that there's something incorrect about that term. I think white privilege actually is a term that supports racism, white supremacy. Dr. Peggy McIntosh, she has been on this program. We talked about that article, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, and some of her more recent works, and she was very resistant. In fact, she refused to use the term white supremacy on the program. She did not agree with my definition. However, she would not volunteer her own definition since she didn't agree with mine, and she contradicted her own work. She has a report that is much more recent than the Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack report, where she says explicitly that one of the things white people can do to help replace white supremacy with justice is to use the term white supremacy. And I continued to quote from her own article, and she would not use the term. She only wanted to use the term white privilege. And I think that that term, when we're talking about, being able to go shopping without being followed and harassed, being able to assume that enforcement officials, police officers are not going to harm me or unjustly incarcerate me, these are not privileges. These are human rights that are denied to non-white people. I think it would be much more accurate to say that non-white people are denied human rights and or that white people receive exploits as a result of the victimization of non-white people. I've seen where privilege, it gets us away from that center stage that you talk about. We end up talking about, and I've seen this play out really bad at the white privilege conference, where we end up talking about, I have privilege because I'm 6 feet tall and you're 5 feet tall. This person has privilege because they have 5 T-shirts and I only have 1 T-shirt, so I have 4 T-shirt privilege. I mean, we're out in the lobby, forget center stage, we're out at the concession stand getting popcorn and fruit snacks. Can you kind of share your thoughts on the term white privilege, and if you think that term is really getting to the heart of the matter of white supremacy?
Well, no, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think it is getting to the heart of white supremacy. White supremacy is about white power, and we need to be talking about white power, not white privilege. Although I think it's useful to talk about white privilege with white people, because it's one way into a conversation about racism and white supremacy. But that is not the heart of it. White privilege is the side effects of white supremacy. And in fact, for most people who are white in this country, I don't even use white privilege. I use white benefits, because white people get benefits, but privileges go to those at the top of the economic pyramid. And most white people are struggling to get by and don't feel any connection to the word privilege. They don't feel like they have any extra in any way. But I think that there's a way that white privilege can get us stuck, like you said, way off center from looking at the structure of decision making and power that white people have. Not only those at the top in decision making places, but everyday decision making, that white people have power in their relationships, in the workplace, and in the schools, and on the streets, in their jobs, in their relationships. And power is the word we should be looking at, not privilege.
Yeah, I try to encourage non-white people to not use that term, because, as I said, I was at the white privilege conference, and white even got disconnected from it. It was just privilege, and I mean, way off stage, way off stage, center stage, excuse me. But yeah, just way off stage. I wanted to. I guess I'm just curious to get your feedback. You talked about how it's important for white people to have kind of a safe space where they can discuss these issues, and I just found that very humorous, as a kind of gallows humor, as a black victim of racism, white supremacy, that white people would need a safe space to talk about racism. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I'd be curious to hear them.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not exactly a safe space. It's a space dedicated to white people looking at racism and doing anti-racist work together. Safety is not possible in this society, nor necessarily such a good thing. But there's a way that white people obviously have the safety to get together with other white people all the time and not have to be accountable to people of color. What I think is useful is for white people to take responsibility for dealing with their own racism and do that with other white people, so that people of color don't have to continually do that for them. And then to challenge each other to actually become anti-racist, which is putting into practice the everyday challenging of white supremacy. So, in a lot of organizations or institutions, it can be useful for white people if they have a dedicated anti-racist commitment and some kind of accountability to people of color, to be able to come together and really look at what they can do to shift things. That's the particular context that comes out of.
I want to share, because I thought this was real important, the section of the book. It's entitled Retaining Benefits, Avoiding Responsibility. I thought these were just excellent ways or strategies that white people use. I want to share those with the audience. One other person called in with a hand. Person calling in, last four digits, 6325. 6325. If you have a question, your line should be open.
Your guest, and again, Gus, this is a wonderful show. Basically, I want to ask your guest, the big elephant in the room, reparations. From your own personal standpoint, and not speaking for others, do you think that black folk should get them? Number 2, if they should, what should they be? And number 3, if you don't think they should, how about the other groups that have received reparations like Jewish and Native Americans and others? Should they have received them? And if so, what should they have been?
Okay, another good question. I'm definitely absolutely in favor of reparations. I think it's long past due, and it would benefit everyone in this country, white people included, if there were reparations for the African American community. I am, there's people who are much more dedicated and smarter than I am who have looked at this and come up with different numbers and different kinds of processes that might make sense in terms of investment in the black community. So I'm not in a place to kind of give a specific proposal, but I think that is the level of the discussion that we should be having, and that anything kind of short of that is not going to shift things. It's not going to make a difference. This country has been built for 500 years on the labor and the contributions of people of color, black, Latino, Native American, Asian American, and without a shift of some of that wealth that's been accumulated back into the communities from where it came, we're not going to really go anywhere further from where we are.
Thank you for the questions, excellent questions, everyone who's participated today. Should have time to see if anybody else, if they have another question or if anybody else wants to call in. The section of the book, Retaining Benefits, Avoiding Responsibility, you describe some of the techniques that white people use when they are challenged about racism, white supremacy. I wanted to just unpack some of these for the listeners. If you could start us off with denial, how that tactic is used.
Well, it's basically where white people say, well, there isn't any racism happening. That comment really wasn't racist, or the fact that we track students of color into lower grades is not racist, or the fact that there's not really racial profiling, or just the ways that we can flat out, contrary to all the evidence in front of us, all the actual reality that we face, can say it's not happening, it's not racist. So that's often the first thing. There's a lot of people in this country today that say there is no more racism. It's over. We did that. We took care of it. Even though that we can look in the job market, the housing market, the schools, the healthcare system, criminal legal system, we can see racism documented, heavily documented in every system, and still people will say, there is no racism. But that gets, for anybody who has any kind of integrity, that's a little hard to maintain because the evidence is so massive. So the next tactic is to minimize it. Well, there are some bad people, there are some white supremacists, and they're the exceptions, but overall things are fine. Or there's a few bad teachers, or a few bad police officers, but basically the police it's a healthy system. So the next kind of tactic is minimization. And then if that doesn't work, these are tactics that we kind of, as white people, switch around and through to try to get something that will stick, basically. If minimization doesn't work, then we go to the blame tactic. Well, they really deserve what they got. So if we talk about welfare, well, they're lazy, they don't work hard, they don't take personal responsibility, or we see this in police brutality cases all the time. Well, he made a movement, or he was aggressive, or he may be laying on his back, handcuffed, with his face on the ground, and still and they'll be, he'll be shot in the back on the ground, like happened here in Oakland at the beginning of the year, and still there'll be an attempt to blame the victim and say, well, he caused it in some way. I mean, so that blame is another tactic. If that doesn't work, then we try to redefine it as, well, it was mutual combat in some way, or both sides were wrong, or not looking at the power imbalances. And so the tactic is to try to make it into a mutual thing rather than a racial thing, a racist thing. Another tactic that we use as white people is that it wasn't intended. And we just saw this in the trial in L.A. of the Bay Area Rapid Transit cop that shot Oscar Grant this year. The prosecution tried to say, well, he intended to pull out his taser, and somehow the gun got into his hand, and so he didn't intend to kill this young black father who was laying on the ground. And so this intention, looking at the intention rather than the impact, is another tactic that we take to try to avoid responsibility for racism. A couple others I'll just mention quickly out of the list. One is we say it's over now. We hear this all the time. Well, that may have been true back before the Civil Rights Movement, but slavery's over, and the laws now are changed, and therefore, or now we have a black president, and therefore it's over. We're in a post-racial society. And of course, there's the competing victimization. We saw this a lot around the affirmative action struggles that, people of color got so much advantage from affirmative action that now white men are suffering, and they're being left out, and they're being discriminated against. So it's a competing victimization plea. That's another tactic for denying that there's racism happening. There's a lot of these very specific tactics that white people use to avoid taking responsibility for the fact that there is racism happening. And I try to talk to white people about how to counter those, how to undermine them, so that we don't end up colluding with this conversation, which basically once again blames people of color for what's happening, for the white supremacy that's happening in our society.
If you don't mind sharing, what are some of the tactics that can be used to counter if a white person begins using the competing victimization tactic? What can you use to try to diffuse that?
Well, I think that the fundamental thing is to go back to the reality of what's happening. What were the dynamics? Who was in charge? Who had the power? Who was on the ground tied up with their hands behind their back? Or who was stopped? What are the statistics show? To take it back to that reality and say, what you're saying just doesn't make sense. White men are in charge of almost every major institution in this country, so how can they be the victims? And very quickly, what you find is that you'll get two responses. One is a white person who's willing to look at that and say, oh, you're right. There probably is some racism happening here. Or you're going to get somebody who just switches tactics and is not in the least interested in understanding what's going on and is only interested in defending white supremacy. And so at that point, you need to decide whether it's worth pursuing the conversation, because it's not a question about how effective you can be in the conversation if somebody is determined to just support white supremacy. It's a waste of your time and energy to try to convince them otherwise. But if it's a white person who is genuinely interested in understanding what's going on and learning more about how racism operates, then it's worth pursuing that conversation and, talking about what's really going on in the community.
Given what we stated earlier, that most white people are interested in maintaining the system of white supremacy, I think it would be logical for non-white people to suspect that a lot of white people are not going to be interested in having this honest dialogue. So you should be on the lookout for some of these strategies. Hopefully you'll be better prepared to pick them out when they're being used. I suspect some of the guests that have been on this program have engaged in these tactics. So I wanted to throw it because you in your book, in breaking down different terms and how people reference themselves, on page 75, because I've been using the term non-white liberally during the broadcast, and on page 75, you were talking about that term, and you said that this term, non-white, equates white as the norm or standard, and everything else as different or non, i.e. negative. I wanted to ask, is that true in a system of white supremacy?
I think that that's the way it operates. There's real people, i.e. white people, and then there's others who are not quite real people, people of color. And so when we say white people and non-white people, non really does mean, in some subtle way, a less than, or not quite equal to, or not quite good enough. So it's there's no, in a system of white supremacy, there's no pure vocabulary. All of our vocabulary is tainted to some extent, and so there's no simple words. People of color is a lump term that glosses over tremendous differences and cultures and histories of people and things like that. Even more general, more specific terms like Asian American or Black or African American also are very broad terms that gloss over vast differences. And so depending upon what we're talking about, we have to be very specific. And there's no perfect vocabulary, but I do think that non-white is one of those terms that perpetuates that kind of inferior, superior kind of relationship.
Wow. Jane Elliott, she is the creator of the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes exercise. She shared a similar sentiment. She was on the program twice about her dislike of the term non-white. As a non-white person, I like the term. Actually, I prefer the term, and I think it can work very well because it states the obvious. I think Charles Mills, a big part of his racial contract is that individuals who are classified as not white are treated and regarded as sub-persons in the system of white supremacy, and I think it's very important to keep that in mind. That's why I think the term is fantastic. Everything that you said about what's incorrect about the term is unfortunately true. I think it just speaks to what's incorrect about the environment in which we live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely see your point. It's just that I think it's often a point that's missed on those that we're talking with. We have to be very explicit about how we understand it, I think.
Valid. Excellent point. Just with terms, because you already said it, that the language is saturated with racism, white supremacy, the terms, and you have a big list in your book of terms and little phrases that, same with non-white people, don't even think about the implications of the phrase or of that particular term. One of them that I point out on this program all the time is the term fair, and I really make an effort to kind of call people on that because particularly Tim Wise, he has been on this program a lot, and he says it consistently. He equates fairness with validity, justice, accuracy, The term also has connotations of beauty and being a even-handed person, and of course, whiteness. And there were two phrases or sentences. One of them early on in the book. This is on page 15, where you said white people will try to appear that they're not racist. They'll say, "Well, I don't see color. We are trying to maintain a self-image of impartiality and fairness," and then you have in parentheses, "and whiteness." And I said that, I mean, it's inescapable, the connection between the term fair and white, and all of the other terms, as I said, validity, reasonableness, beauty even. And then on page 21, where you have the list, you do have one of the qualities of whiteness being fair, in addition to healthy, civilized, normal, moral. Can you talk about that and why, if you think that's correct, that we should really be mindful about not equating fairness, whiteness with validity, correctness, justice?
Right. I mean, I think that one of the ways that white people justify white supremacy is that we are superior, we're rational, we're objective, we're scientific, and therefore we should be in charge. And so when we use words like that without being aware of that, then we're implicitly supporting that people of color are too emotional or subjective or non-scientific or traditional, or all kinds of ways that the language reflects that superior-inferior dichotomy. So, yeah, there's just it's a language that both elevates white people, but either explicitly or implicitly it puts down people of color at the same time. And so we have to be aware of how it works at both ends, basically. Because if somebody's fair, then another group of people is going to be labeled unfair, or if some group's rational, then it's by implicitly another group is irrational or not quite as rational.
I think the brain, we don't give enough respect to the power that the human mind has. Those connections are made even if we're not conscious of them. The mind is making those connections, and the implications for referencing one group of people as scientific, it's just it's implied the other group is not.
Right.
You on page 113 of Uprooting Racism, I felt this was real important because a lot of folks, they suggest that non-white people and white people engaging in sexual intercourse, that will help erode racism. And on page 113, you said that the presence of large numbers of people of mixed heritage does not mean that we are moving toward the elimination of racism through the withering away of racial differences. It is perfectly possible to replace a racial hierarchy of discrete groups with a racially continuous one, which still has white people on top, such as is found in Brazil. Unless we eliminate white power and privilege, people with lighter skin color, regardless of racial heritage, will be more highly valued than people with darker skin. Can you, if you have anything you'd like to add on that, it would be great.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, that it's not about who we live with in our families. It's about the way the institutions operate and who has power in the society. So the fact that that we have increasing numbers of mixed racial families is a positive thing. I think it does have some ripple effects into the society in many ways. But at the same time, as long as those who are whitest are on top, nothing has really changed. So yeah, I don't have much to add except that I just emphasize that I think that we can hope. We might hope that interpersonal relationships are going to solve social and political and economic problems, but we know that they are not.
Again, our guest for today's program, Mr. Paul Kivel. The website, paulkivel.com. Kivel, K-I-V-E-L, paulkivel.com. Context of white supremacy. You talk about biracial groups and the increasing numbers of these folks and how that disrupts the white-black binary. Could you share a little bit about that?
Well, I think that, until 1967, miscegenation, or the intermixing of the cross-racial relationships, were illegal in many states in the United States. And in 67, the Supreme Court ruled that laws against that were struck down, basically. But that shows you how powerful that fear has been among white people. Now, of course, white people had lots of sexual relationships with people of color, but when those were made legitimate, formalized, legalized, that was very threatening to white people's conception of themselves as separate and superior and pure. The concept of the white race, and it's obviously, I think most of your listeners know that race itself is a construct. There's no biology involved at all in it. Everybody shares the entire world, 99.9% of the same genes. So it is a construct, but the fact that people can live together and have biracial children and multiracial families does break down a certain justification that's been used historically for racism, and that that's useful to some extent.
I guess I would be curious to get your opinion. Let me make sure we're on the same footing. It is my view the entire concept of race supports the system of racism, white supremacy. There is no biological foundation that would support the notion of race. It is a political construct used explicitly to demarcate the white group from the non-white group. That is my understanding of race. I don't know. We might not be on the same page.
Yeah, I
agree.
Think? I agree completely with you there.
Oh, okay. Therefore, I feel that when we start saying that, not talking about us, but just in general, when people begin using the terms biracial, multiracial, I feel that it adds further confusion. It presumes that there's such a thing as a pure race to begin with, and now that you've got two parents of those different pure races, now you've got a biracial person. And I just feel that the entire use of these terms and creating, they've got this has become a whole different movement now. You have the biracial movement. I just feel it adds total confusion, and it supports racism, white supremacy, because it supports the notion of race. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think on the one hand, I think you're completely correct that it does lead to kind of reinforcing the myth in people's minds that races are something that are out there apart from how they're constructed politically. I think that the movement of biracial and multiracial people has been because there's been no place for them to stand because they've been often asked to decide which side they're on of a non-existent two sides, but one that makes a difference. They've been asked to declare, well, are you white or are you black, or are you Asian American or are you Latino? Which do you identify with, or who are you really? And so they've claimed an identity to claim a space to build community around and to have some visibility. And that's important. And I don't know how we do that, how we open up those spaces without basically objectifying race once again. So I think that's a really complex area that we haven't gotten to a point where we can, be clear about what is the best way to really talk about the complexities of people's heritages and cultures and backgrounds. I mean, and ultimately, we're all mixed race. I mean, we all came out of Africa, and we all have so much of the same genes that makes no sense to speak of that at all. And at the other hand, because it makes so much difference, people are trying to figure out a way to have a place to stand in it.
I would assert that the only reason that it makes so much difference is because of the system of white supremacy. If you didn't have racism, white supremacy, all this stuff would, be by the wayside. I would challenge, I don't think the offspring of these relationships, when you have parents that are in two different racial classifications, I don't think the offspring get to decide their racial classification. I'll say specifically, they don't get to decide if they're white. White people decide who's on the white team. That has been my observation. I don't think a non-white like President Obama, I don't think he could decide, I'm a white person. I don't think that decision would be up to him. I don't know. What is your view on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't choose our race so much as it's chosen. We have a racial identity as depends upon how we're perceived as we walk down the street, and the police interact with us, or how we sit in the classroom and the teacher and other students respond to us. At the same time, a fair number of people do pass, or are not easily categorizable, and therefore, those boundaries are never as sharp and clear as we'd like to pretend that they are. But overall, in general, I think you're absolutely true. We don't choose our identities. We're responded to based upon the perceptions of the people and systems around us.
Have my listening cap on. I hope everybody caught that, because that was huge. A fair number of people do pass. Indeed, a fair number of people do pass.
People who are fair.
For sure. But I don't think that's most of the people. Most of the people that are the offspring of a white person and a non-white person, I don't think most of them can pass. I think most of them, white people would not accept them as a white person. And that's why I really feel like it's moving us away from center stage. I feel like if those people, the bulk of them that are not going to be classified as white, if they non-white, we're not white, and we're keeping the focus, even in the term that we use to reference ourselves, we're staying focused on the problem is white people. These are the folks that are at the center of power. It's all that other stuff is really irrelevant if we can take care of the main problem, which is white people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And of course, for white people, then the lighter the person of color, the more likely they are to be acceptable in certain ways, or to be able to be representative in certain ways. So again, white people get to reinforce skin color hierarchies, so to speak, within communities of color as well.
Have you seen that play out, where white people treat lighter complexion non-white people better, or have you done that yourself?
Well, I think there's probably subtle ways that I've done it myself. I think it's most clear in the media that the people of color who are often held up as role models or movie stars or sports heroes or things are often lighter skinned. And I see it just in organizations that I've been in, that people who are, and there are studies that show that people of color who are hired are more likely to be lighter than darker. So that there's definitely kind of a gatekeeping that white people do around, given that they have to allow some people of color into some places, they can choose who they're most comfortable with, and they're more comfortable with those who are lighter.
Wow. I will have to say I was very surprised with the book and the program. I think it's been very constructive. Folks that are still on the line, if they want to comment or offer their thoughts, I'll be glad to hear what they have to say. But I was very surprised, particularly I was reading the introduction at the beginning of Uprooting Racism, How White People Can Work for Racial Justice. The first thing I read, it said that we have a long and distinguished history on this continent of white people who have fought against racism and racial violence. That right there, I was already thinking, oh man, this is not going to be a constructive book. This is going to be a celebration of John Brown and different abolitionists. And I feel like I heard that again. It was on. Oh, here it is on page. This is page 11. Page 12 in the introduction, where it says many white people have stood up against racism. And I was just like, man, that. Most white people have practiced racism, white supremacy. The white people who have been against this system or who have alleged to be against this system, they have been insufficient and mostly ineffective. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Is that an accurate statement in this system?
Yes, it is. Like we were talking about earlier, the majority of white people have always been firmly in support and colluding with the system of white supremacy. But I think it's really important for white people who are entering this discussion or are trying to figure out what they can do or how they can get involved to realize that they're not starting from the beginning, that there is a history of white anti-racist activists, and there is a tradition of white people stepping up, and that they can look to those people as role models, and not that any of them or any of us are perfect or non-racist in any absolute sense, but that people who saw situations of discrimination, of violence, of exploitation, of genocide, and stepped up and started getting involved in doing things to stop it. So, particularly in talking to white people, I think we need to honor that and invite them to join that. But at the same time, not to overplay its significance historically or to glamorize it or glorify it or to, describe it out of proportion to what it was. If there had been more white people, we wouldn't be where we are today. It's the fact that not enough white people have stepped up that we still have this entrenched system of white supremacy.
I think it's been pretty solid. I will thank Khadijah again. Thank you for the recommendation. I was not informed about Mr. Kivel's work, but I think lots of constructive information. Let me make sure I don't have other callers. I have a question. I have a question that was typed in. This is from Counter Racist Evolving Engineer right here at Blog Talk Radio. Her question is, can a white person choose to reclassify themselves and then, therefore, function as a light-skinned, non-white person who is treated as white by those to whom they have no opportunity to declare their non-white status? That is, to choose to reclassify themselves and then function as Walter White, Adam Clayton Powell, etc. Does that make sense?
Well, I think so. I mean, if I understand it, I would have to say that because, being white is often just how we're treated by other people who perceive us, it depends a little bit about our actual physical characteristics, whether we could pass as a person of color in situations, as a light-skinned person of color, for instance. Most white people are white enough that they're going to be treated as white, however they self-classify, by social welfare workers, by the police, by the shopkeeper, by apartment owners, and things like that. And so you'd literally, I think, need to change the way you talk, the way you acted and dressed, perhaps your name, as well as, to really try to reclassify yourself is a much more serious and complete transformation than I think is really even possible for most white people. So, it's an interesting question, but it's difficult to imagine people wanting to do that.
I agree. I was going to say, I guess there are public records of white people who have done this. The gentleman, Black Like Me, he went through that transformation and wrote a book about it, and I believe there's a white person who copied that study more recently in the 90s, and he got similar results. He also wrote about it, but I guess there's documents that it has documented evidence that it has been done. But I'm of the same opinion. I don't know why a white person would want to do that. Somebody called in, last four digits 5594. 5594. Did you have a question for Mr. Kivel? Uh, 5594. Did you have a question, or are you just listening?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I have a question for the guest. I was looking on his website, and a term was used, justice. So my question is, do he have a definition for the word justice?
That's a good question. I have a concept in my mind about what a just society would be, and it would be one that people, regardless of race or gender or class or sexual orientation or ability or disability, would have a full range of support and opportunity and participation and political representation equal to anybody else. That would be justice in some sense. I think that my vision is of a just society, and what I define by that is a society in which every person is cared for and valued regardless of who they are, and in this society would provide adequate shelter, food, education, recreation, health care, security, and well-paying jobs for all people. The land would be respected and sustained, and that the society would value cooperation over competition, community development over individual achievement, and democratic participation over hierarchy and control. And finally, it would be based on interdependence over dependence or independence. That, in other words, there's a lot of kind of simple or short-term justice visions, I think, or definitions, and mine is really a radical transformation of our society that would include all aspects of our lives and our relationship to the earth and the natural environment.
I think we might have produced a constructive program. Again, the website where you can go and check out Mr. Kivel's other books, paulkivel.com, paulkivel.com, author of Uprooting Racism and many other titles. Thoroughly enjoyed having you on the program, sir. I think it was constructive. I hope it was a constructive investment of your Monday afternoon.
Absolutely. It's always important for us to be talking about this stuff. I really appreciate the program you're doing, and hopefully it's been informative to the listeners.
I hope so. I'm sure they will provide some feedback. Thank you so much, and we will be in touch soon, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. All right. Context of white supremacy. I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with the cows.
Our people are very serious about not being very serious. Meanwhile, white people are very serious about playing hardball against us. And this hardball is called genocide.
The second annual Nat Turner Day Weekend Celebration 2010, The Resurrection of Haiti, Friday, August 20th to Sunday, August 22nd, at the Church of the Advocate, 1801 West Diamond Street, Philadelphia, PA, sponsored by the Children of Southampton, featuring Umar Abdullah Johnson, the Irritated Genie of Southeast, Sister Nefertari, Mary Moot Nzinga, the Universal African Dance and Drum Ensemble, the Lest We Forget Black Holocaust Slave Museum, and a special feature, the Nat Turner Day African Insurrection Musical with Brothers Keeper, the African Marketplace, and much, much more. The cost for the entire weekend, $50 for black adults, $25 for black students and children under 12, and $25 for black elders 65 and older. For more information, contact the Children of Southampton at www.ourcause.com. That's www.ourkos.com or 888-817-3235. That's toll free at 888-817-3235.
Context of white supremacy. Quick reminders. I believe Cree will have a program coming up this weekend on Sunday. I think she's still trying to get the logistics together, but she should have a broadcast this Sunday. If she has the time and everything posted, I will update that. Our next broadcast. We have a program tomorrow. Just hasn't been entered in the computer because just been very busy, and not having my own computer slightly slowed things down, but not too much. If I've had computer access, but if I'd had my own computer, maybe it would be just a hair more productive. MacBook Pro. But yeah, we do have a program tomorrow. I'll get it entered into the computer ASAP. It is with one of the representatives from the Gay and Lesbian Advocacy Association in Washington, D.C. Should be very constructive. Get to hear directly from them. What are they doing to push white sex, homosexual activity and such, particularly being in D.C. with so many black folks. But it'll be tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Central. Should be very interesting. Gay and Lesbian Advocacy Association. Looking forward to it. Other announcements that I have to make. Can't think of any other announcements right now. Cree's program should be Sunday. The cows will be back tomorrow. Dr. Baruti will be back for part 4, August 26th. Already started scheduling past August 5th because, got the deadline taken care of. Just not enough funds for the MacBook Pro, so still soliciting investments. If I had really been on my game, I would have asked Mr. Kivel for an investment today. I just got caught up in the program. That was a mistake. Oh well. The folks that called in, your lines are open. Should have 818 and 909 if you all have any comments.
Ooh, sorry about that. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted to say I found the information that he shared refreshing. As far as some things he was saying, I could say he was saying honestly because I've experienced them for myself, as far as white people feeling the need to control the situation and to control non-white people and expect them to obey. I have a neighbor where I just moved from, and usually she's really chatty, white woman. I'd say she's probably about in her 60s, always in everybody's business, but always in mine. And just a few weeks ago, she was like, oh, if you're moving somewhere, you need a character reference, I'll reference you, and if somebody tries to do you wrong, I'll get them, I'll stand up, and I'll defend you. Like she was all powerful woman. Well, when it came to supposedly saving the life of a dog, she turned on me. There was someone in the building, they say it was a blonde girl who had left her dog on the patio, so the dog's barking all night. They claim it had been barking for a week. She was on a rant about how they were going to get the ASCP, whatever you call the animal people, to break into the house and rescue this dog. So there's another white female there, and I'm talking to her because she's the calm one. And I'm saying, well, you might want to wait until the leasing office is open, and perhaps they can call the person who lives in the apartment to see, if she'll come check on her dog. The woman got in my face. She started wagging her finger at me. She started speaking to me about what she was going to do and, oh, no, this and that. And I told her, hey, can you stop yelling at me? What are you talking about? We're talking about a dog. Why are you in my face yelling at you? Because this is a dog's life at stake, and I'm saving a dog. And I said, you're not saving anything by yelling in my face and talking to me like you're crazy. She backed off. She then told me to shut up and stop talking, and I told her, you don't tell me what to do. And then she'll just get out of here. We weren't in her house. We were in the courtyard of the building. So she proceeded to command me as to what to do and act as if I had to leave and change my location based on her not desiring me there. All that switching from being the best of friends and so concerned about me and willing to give a character reference and all of this a week or two ago. This is not the first experience I've had with white people behaving that way, and I find it's usually older white people who do this, like, without apology. Oh, and a few seconds later, she was back in my face talking to me again like we were the best of friends. So it was a really odd but eye-opening experience as far as, to her character.
I think Mr. Fuller says trashy, tacky, and terroristic. I hope people caught that when Mr. Kivel said that for white people it is a real struggle to even be neighborly with a non-white person. That's why I said I really got distracted from the investment because I was going to ask, but he was surprisingly honest, I felt. I was kind of floored when he said that. It's. I believe he said that exactly. It's a struggle for white people to even be in a neighborly relationship with a non-white person.
Hello?
Hello.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Kivel, I got so much just going through my head right now. I would like to have invited him to like a dinner with my family so they could hear him talk about the fact that white people are gatekeepers and white people have, coded language. And I think for some non-white people listening to him, I think it's like I don't know how I think it'll be shocking if they were. It was mad solid, and when he started talking about the code language, I was like, man, they have code language for, how they talk about different non-white people. Like they come up with different names that we haven't even heard of, so they can say it like right in your face, and you don't even know that, they're talking about you or, what non-white group they're talking about. So when you were saying like when do they start learning these things, and he said that they're basically taught, from a young age, this coded language.
Have either of you heard that white people use codification in calling black people Canadians?
That's in Joe Fagan's book, Two-Faced Racism. He's written a lot of books, but that specific book, he talks about that. He has a whole chunk of the book that talks about how white people have code terms for talking about non-white people and black people, especially black people. In fact, their code is so intricate. They have a code that's specific for white people who work in food service industry. They have a specific racist code for white people in the food service industry. And Canadians was one, moon crickets, like it was real elaborate.
Double whammy.
You know, the welfare thing I've noticed is also codification for black people or Mexicans. I was at Starbucks, and I was having a conversation with the black female next to me. We were talking about politics, and, I was talking to her about my views on Obama and different things like that. There's an old white man sitting nearby in a chair, and white people are nosy. They are. When there's non-white people talking, you will noticeably find when a white person is within earshot, they are staring down your throat, listening to everything you say. And I saw him doing this. So we're talking, and he interjects. Meg Whitman, she's running for governor. She's going to get rid of welfare. She says, you don't work, you don't get anything. No work, no money. And then he started talking about Ralph's. It's a grocery store. I didn't know what Ralph's had to do with welfare. And I asked him, and he went on this rant about all these people getting welfare, and it's generational. You got people that have never worked a day in their life, and they're living in public housing, and I mean, come on, I'm a black person. I know you're talking about black people. When he went into the whole generational thing, and you don't work, you don't eat. And I'm thinking to myself, there's actually more white people from what I've read on welfare than other people, but why would you feel the freedom to interrupt our conversation with this welfare rant? And I tried to steer him away from it by pointing out that a lot more of our economy is spent on war and other frivolous things than on welfare, and that I would think, if anything, instead of giving trillions of dollars to Wall Street bankers, some of that money should be spent on citizens and people who are unemployed and can't find work. And he just went on his rant, and eventually we had to move and get out of there because he was just on this whole welfare rant. But he felt that it was okay for him to just interrupt our conversation, to take over and control it, and then to diss us or black people in the process using the code word welfare. Like we wouldn't know that he was talking about black people or in this state, Mexican people as well.
Yeah, that's pretty true. They have that, like he says, the coded language, welfare. He said inner city, gang. So like if you see a group of people, and if they're black, what I'm saying, or non-white also, they'll say a gang. That it was there is a gang of they classify them as a gang. And ghetto, he said. And I was just thinking, the show Gus did yesterday. I was just thinking, I know Gus always says that he doesn't believe in coincidence. And on the Boondocks, there was this one scene where Riley said, I'm not going into the, what did he say? I'm not going into foster care. Yeah.
How about this one, 909? Have you ever heard the term after something catastrophic has happened where they say, where you least expect it, indicating that it's a white neighborhood? I think it was Channel 7 News out here, and it was something like, suddenly there's a problem with heroin where you least expect it. I said, oh, God, must be in some white people's neighborhoods where we least expect it. Like, why wouldn't we expect it there? White people do drugs, too. But, it's that codified language, and it's just, when I hear things like that, I get really pissed off because it's just like, it's refined, but yet it's blatant because I recognize it. And I also notice this on the news. Whenever there's a story of someone black being shot or a crime in a black neighborhood, they always send out the black reporter. Same thing for Asians and Hispanics. Have you noticed that? That they match the reporter to the ethnicity of the people in the neighborhood or the victims, and then they get the person on the news. Like there was a black woman, and I don't know if she shot somebody or she had a knife. And I'm like, I wish we had emergency PR people to go tell our people, just be quiet. Because they didn't even have to reveal the woman's identity or history. But they interviewed her son. Well, you know, my mom wasn't always like this. I mean, she been on drugs. She was in prison before. But, like, this is not like, I'm thinking, shut up. Just, like, stop speaking. Don't say anything, man.
Yeah, like you said, recognizing it, you know, mostly in the writing when I'm reading like different things. Yeah, you just recognize the language, and it's definitely. I don't know. It's just like you said. It's irritating, really, because you know that it seems like they're deliberately misleading people with the language, and you recognize it because you know you're studying, you know, racism, white supremacy, so you recognize it, you know, but. That's what I'm saying. Like, you know, people around you, they don't recognize. Like I was saying, like, you know, with my family and whatever, it would be good. You know, like I said, Dr. Kivel, you know, him talking about this issue. I think I would just like to see something like that. Like, I would just like to see somebody like him at like some of the gatherings that we have, and just say some of the things that he said, and just see the reactions. You know, because people around you, they don't recognize these things, and it's like they're in denial, but at the same time, yeah, they're you can't even call it denial, but because they're not even informed about it, so they don't believe that dark-skinned males are not being hired or whatever, you know, because of their skin color.
Wasn't there a study or something recently that showed that?
Yeah, there's many studies showing that. It's like, it's been proven so many times at these different universities that went out and studied these things. It's everywhere.
I know there was a report as well that in online dating, they said that black females respond the most or the quickest, but receive the fewest responses. And they said that white men get the most inquiries, you know, or people sending them messages, but seem to be perhaps very lazy about replying back, or they're the slowest to respond. I think it's maybe because they feel like they can pick whoever they want, and they, you know, their demand is high, so they can get around to it whenever and take their time. But it was interesting to know that even online, black comes last in online dating.
It's crazy, man. But people just do not think it's reality. I tell you, man, they just do. You know, I'm confused, big time. I mean, I'm confused. It's like, I think this might be the first time I ever said that I'm confused. You know what I'm saying? But I'm definitely confused. But I don't know. Like, I'm confused. My confusion right now is on the this whole race thing, because like, I understand it, but at the same time I don't, because I seen some documentary where this guy went around and he was taking the Y chromosome from all these different parts of the world, and he was basically tracing the migration and stuff, and he came up with all of these different scenarios on human migration and how they developed, taking these blood samples and you know, Y chromosome, studying this Y chromosome, and what he was finding was these genetic mutations, you know, from one group of people. Then when they moved into an area, they were still that people, but somewhere along the line, their genes mutated, and then that was a totally different line coming out that he was basically tracing. So that that part confuses me because I don't know exactly what are the implications of that. Because I know that when Rome went into Germania, or in France, and those people didn't have no language, and they had been living there for a long time, but they never developed a language, and it was, to me, that's weird. Like, why did they never develop a language? And then you see how they were living, just like disgusting kind of situate, ways that that they were living, no baths, didn't, just. So I'm wondering, like, did that have something to do with why they didn't really develop? And does that have something to do with why the white people are the way that they are?
I don't know. It's confusing to me as well because, you have the scientific stuff and then you have the biblical stuff, and I know some people don't take that into account. Like, I can say I'm not a Christian anymore, but I do believe that the so-called Old Testament is valuable for a lot of history. And there's books that weren't included in the King James one being the Book of Enoch and the other the Book of Jasher. And they're more detailed with the family trees, especially regarding the descendants of Japheth, one of Noah's sons. But I also found another book online. I don't remember the name of it. I have the ebook in my computer. Maybe I can upload it to Scribd or something or put it on my blog. But it's really does a pretty good job of tracing the different descendants of Japheth. And actually, he does such a good job that it traces them to the places where they currently are in Europe. But even with that, I don't believe that they started off as white people. So it's, a thing of trying to figure out the connect of where they came from. Was it a group of albinos, who maybe were cast out of places in Africa and moved north because of the weather and being outcast? I don't know. It's difficult to tell because there's also books like, I can't remember the guy's last name, but I think it's called Ancient and Modern Britons, and he talks about the first people in those areas being black people and there being a history of them there. So I still don't know where the white people in particular came from. We've heard a lot of different theories about why they are the way they are, from Michael Bradley to the whole story of the Tamahu and different things like that, to the Nation of Islam saying they were grafted from something else by Yaqub and all this other stuff. I don't know. I really don't know, but the thing to me that makes the most sense would be that a group of albinos would migrate further north because the climate is more tolerable for their condition. Just looking at the difficulty that albinos have today in places like Tanzania and different places like that, and that in Africa that always has been like a cause for rejection. Even, what country is it? I'm trying to think, is it Ghana or it's somewhere in West Africa, but there's a musician, something Kaita or Kaiti, actually Mali, and he is an albino musician. And I was reading that story, and they were talking about how he did face rejection in his family because of that. He's actually a descendant, I think, of Sunni Ali, or one of the great leaders of the Malian Empire, or the Songhai Empire. But, yeah, it would make sense to me that a group of albinos would migrate north, but, it's like, how do you get to the point that you have great numbers of white people, or as Dr. Wilson would say, they were albinos?
Hey, that musician you're talking about, his name is Salif Keita.
Yeah. And his music is awesome. I enjoyed it when I heard it.
And if you want, whoever would like to see that documentary, if you type in Y chromosome, you'll see the documentary. This white dude, he went around taking these blood samples and he has some interesting findings.
Do you believe in the accuracy of the things they're putting out about DNA at this point? Or do you think that some of it may be for other purposes or intentions?
Yeah, I definitely, I don't know if I say I believe it, but, from 1 to 100%, I'll give it like 85%. So that's pretty high.
It's been interesting to me to find out that much of the work in DNA is dominated by Israelis or so-called Jewish people, whether they be here or there, but definitely in Israel. And like I knew that already, but when the Irritated Genie was on an episode of the show, he was saying with the whole African ancestry DNA testing to be careful because they had been patenting the DNA, or trying to, of the Maasai people in Kenya, and that they were taking the DNA of black people who were trying to find their ancestry. And he said that someone in that industry told him they were using it to create biological warfare against us. So that, and then I'm watching a show, I don't remember which show it was, it's a current show on TV, but Dick Wolf, who's also Jewish, was the producer. So, I kind of connect things. It's like I categorize things and put them away in my mind, and sometimes the connections are weird. So on this show, one of the investigators, she's a white female, is set up for a crime, and her DNA is at the scene, but she wasn't there. And nobody can figure out how her DNA shows up at the scene. Well, written in the script, and we know that much of Hollywood is dominated by Jewish writers, producers, directors, executives, studio owners, which is another disagreement I have with what the guest said today. My research shows they dominate a lot. But anyway, they're trying to figure out how on earth her DNA could get there, her blood DNA. She has no cuts on her, no bruises, anything. Well, they find out that there's a laboratory in Israel, and they found a way to synthetically manufacture DNA. And I'm just like, okay, this is crazy. From what he said to that, and knowing who dominates that industry, like, is it the thing where they are admitting or letting you know what they do before they do it, through a show that's like a CSI or crime type show, like, it was just too weird to see all that go together. So I'm not always extremely trusting of the science that white people come out with.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, we were born into, like Gus said, he said some stuff that, like he said, keep the focus on white people, because, when I was growing up, man, we were definitely angry at our so-called elders, but we didn't have that. Keep the focus on white people. We just were angry at our elders because we didn't feel like they were stepping up. And then at the same time they were demanding like a certain amount of respect, but they wasn't really. We didn't feel like they were like really backing us up, and keeping the focus on white people is important, man, because it took me a long time to get, not to be upset, with the welfare, the welfare system and the group homes and all the runaways and the throwaways, and it was pretty drugs and stuff like that. So I'm glad Gus said that today. Keep the focus on white people, because we'll start talking about each other a lot, and in all kind of crazy ways. But I did ask him about the Jewish and black relationships, because there's a lot, there's a lot of history there. Jewish people are supposed to have founded the NAACP, and just what you were saying as far as the genetic, if that's true, that Israel is, big on that, and they were supposed to have been, biological warfare was used on them. And I and then when Gus said, well, at the last of the talk, Gus was asking the question. He said, could a non-white person, if they change their name, he was saying if you change your name, change the way you talk, and change the way you dress. But like Jewish people, like Hillary Clinton, is just something that came to mind, because she changed her name from like Rottingham to Rodham, so now it's Hillary Rodham. And the Jewish people, they changed their name to sound more white.
Right. John Kerry is John Cohn or Cohen, and his grandfather changed it to Kerry.
What was that about, Gus? What did you ask him? He do you remember?
I believe Cree's question was, can a white person reclassify themselves as a non-white person and be accepted as non-white? And I think he said that he thinks it would be a difficult process, that they would have to change a lot to do that. As I said during the program, I know, there's written evidence that it has been done, that white people have changed, either putting on makeup, changing their hair, name, etc., skin complexion, to be accepted as non-white. They've written books about it and reports and stuff. There's several. The more I thought about it, there are other books other than the two that I was thinking of, where a white person reclassified himself as non-white in order to get the inheritance of a non-white person. And I think there's the gentleman at the White Privilege Conference, the fake Indians. He had a whole presentation about white people who have deceived people and said that they were non-white, so-called Native American, to get a financial benefit. So, it has been done repeatedly.
909, have you gotten a chance yet to read The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2?
Mm-hmm.
I highly suggest, seriously, you got to get the book. I haven't finished it. I'm working on reading it. But the thing that I appreciate about the series of books that's put out by the Nation of Islam, people will try to, they want to attack the person, so they'll whine about, the author's names aren't on it, it just says research team. But that's really not too relevant, because for every page that there is on the book, you'll find at least 4, if not 15 or more levels of footnotes, rows of footnotes, where the information came from. And what I'm learning from the book was that when Jewish people came to the Americas, even back in the slavery days, earlier than that, they were already in the Americas, because they were primary in the sugar plantation and sugar processing that initially brought our ancestors over as slaves. But it shows how they did the same thing that, like what Jacqueline Badalore said, mistreating black people or other non-white people in order to earn whiteness. And it shows how they were just as dedicated in supporting the system of racism, white supremacy, as white people were, and sometimes they outdid them, to the point of holding office as mayors during Jim Crow, during the slavery period, how there's towns throughout Arkansas, different places in the South named after Jews, how they dominated commerce. It gives the names of Jews who were slave owners, bankers, members of the Ku Klux Klan, and even in testimony of their own historians, that they were never mistreated in this country and were not subject to anti-Semitism or any type of racism, and they even boasted that because of the privileges and benefits they had here, many of them felt like this was their promised land because they were able to practice their religion, thrive economically, and would even send word to their fellow tribesmen across in Europe to come. And it really gives great information, detailed information on the parts that they played in the mistreatment and subjugation of black people. So, a lot of times we're told about the civil rights era, but that's a really short history in time, and we hear virtually nothing about the centuries before that. And this book is loaded with it.
I just think people probably get irritated hearing about Jews, but I'm interested in the psychology of white people because they came up with a system. They came up with a way to control minds, and I know it's upwards of 80% of the Nobel Prizes are like Jewish people. Mm-hmm. Einstein, Sigmund Freud. So it's scientific basically how they are controlling us. So I think if people get irritated hearing about Jews or whatever, I just find it interesting that they come up with these scientific methods of control and whatnot. I just think that that's interesting because they're using it on us. They're controlling people.
Well, when you look at who controls the media, and you'll see people say time after time that it's some myth or urban. It's totally not an urban legend. You can look up and find plenty of articles online that show you who owns CBS, NBC, ABC, Viacom, Fox Media. You can even see who founded all of these companies. You will always find either Jewish people bought them from the other Gentiles, or they founded them, and to this day they are still under Jewish control. You'll even see articles. I saw TMZ, it was during Passover, and they found Cato Kalin outside of some club, and they were talking about how empty the streets of Hollywood were. And they said, why is it empty? Because it's Passover, so there's no Jews, and Jews control Hollywood. They didn't have a problem saying it, but if you say it and you're not Jewish, then they act like, like it's, the worst thing of calling somebody, oh, you're a racist, or oh, you're anti-Semite, then it goes to that. But all somebody has to do is do the research. I mean, it's that simple. We have the internet at our fingertips, so anything you want to find out, you can research it. It's documented. But I would also really advise getting the book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, because it is so rich in footnotes. So you'll learn a lot more about American history and the involvement of different groups of white people from these books. Because none of the books were written as an expose of Jewish people. It's just their history in the Americas. And they're all written by Jewish people. And the other one I'd advise getting to is the book Jews Selling Blacks, where you can find photocopies of different auction ads and slave sale ads in newspapers from, I think there's some in there as early as the 1600s through the 1800s, where it's obvious that by the names that the person selling the slave is Jewish. They're very good at research.
I was just thinking about when he was talking about the gatekeepers. Hey, I remember one time this dude told me, I had said something, I had used some word that he'd never heard before, and he said that you could make it in the white man's world. That's what this black dude told me one time, and I didn't think about it. I just answered him real quick. I was like, no, I ain't trying to make it. In the white man's world, in this white supremacist society. I'm trying to see some change or whatever. But really, but for some reason, I felt kind of happy inside.
Clever?
Huh?
So did you feel more clever?
No, I just felt like when he was talking about the gatekeeping, and then I just brought that time up where he said you could make it in the white man's world. He said because you have some, I don't know, whatever he was thinking, you know what I'm saying. But I just felt like I'm not the average so-called black. I just felt like, well, maybe I could, and it was just a weird feeling that it just brought me back to that when he was talking about the gatekeepers. That, some people think just because they're light-skinned or whatever that they have it better than, what I'm saying, somebody that's dark-skinned or whatever. But I don't know.
Well, in some ways, honestly, they may experience less mistreatment, unfortunately, because even black people have been trained that light is better and to reject a darker person. So, yeah, you probably would get it not only from white people, but also from your own people as well. And look, even in other cultures that are not black cultures, being darker is looked down upon.
Right. And your condition, too, they try to condition you to be like, well, you're getting treated better than, my dark-skinned classmate or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So you don't want to ruffle no feathers or stick up for them or whatever. And, I would always, sometimes, not always, but a lot of times I would, that's just how I guess I was raised or whatever, I would speak out and, say, like, that's not fair, or I would basically try to point out something that, the so-called authority figure was doing that, that wasn't fair, to try to help, you know what I'm saying? Because
Did you just say fair?
Twice.
Oh, Lord.
We need a sound effect for the word fair.
I have never even used that word before. I don't know. I guess you talked about it so much today, man. It just got inculcated somehow.
Maybe we need a cow being shot or something.
Wow.
Or
I'll have to
line
think of
from
something
some
else.
fairy tale.
Yeah.
Fairest of them all.
Yeah. That will have to be a new project. Sound effects there.
Something from Snow White.
But you did say that word a lot today, so I blame you, man. You know what I'm saying?
Blaming the victim. Oh, man. Dang.
So not fair.
Double whammy.
Dang.
Hey, but seriously, Gus, did you trip on that? Did you think that was interesting? The fact that Riley said that he didn't want to go in foster care right after the show that you had.
I did catch it. I mean, I've said that I don't believe in, coincidence or whatever. But I did catch that. I immediately thought of the program with Dorothy Roberts and was just like, man. And you know what I was thinking? There will be another program on the Boondocks before the season ends because I just know they're going to give me some material. But I was thinking that's why I'm totally willing to stand on all of my thoughts, opinions, observations that I've made about the Boondocks thus far, because each program just continues to compound and add more evidence to what I've said before. Like the gay references were there in yesterday's broadcast, and with that comment, I just felt like a big part of my criticism with the Boondocks is that I feel like it was a very strong social commentary when it began, and I felt like that I question whether or not that's still there, and that might be part of why the show is ending this season. But I feel like you lose some of the commentary if you're just putting things out there just to be funny. Then there are times where it's like, okay, is this out to be funny or is this out to be a commentary? And I just felt like I've seen a lot more stuff that was thrown out just to be funny and wasn't really a commentary. And the more of that I get, then it really tends to erode the sincerity that I would tend to give when they do have a serious commentary. So I did see it. Given what Dorothy Roberts shared with us yesterday, I didn't find it quite as humorous yesterday. But yeah, more to come on the Boondocks down the road.
Yeah, I was just thinking your timing is, man. I was like, Gus got some timing, man. Like, that's incredible. You know what I'm saying? That would be on that Boondocks, and we have the show talking about foster care, and that's basically was a lot of the shows. Like basically, Granddad was going to jail.
Things, and that happens every day. Like that happens every day, where it's not a joke, it's not funny. The judge is not, just joking around with you like, oh, well, maybe President Obama did legalize marijuana. I'll check and see. I mean, that's just easy grounds for termination, or not termination, but white people taking custody of your child. Easy grounds. And, it was just kind of made light of.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, in contrast to Dorothy Roberts breaking, that and like you said, making light of it. I mean, that's just a horrible situation. And I did want to ask you, did you kind of understand what I was saying? Because I had this quote that said that what did it say? It said problems are opportunities in work clothes. And I was thinking that and that's why I said yesterday that people that are getting these situations, it seems like that's an opportunity for them to work in that field for justice. Don't you think that most people that get into certain work is because they had a problem? They were abused in some way, they were mistreated, and then they said, you know what, I'm going to work towards this issue. Doesn't it seem like that's how people get into different work?
I know I did not get. I used to be a foster care worker. I didn't get into foster care work because I had a I didn't have any previous contact with foster care. I didn't have any close connections with anybody who had been in foster care growing up. So I'm sure that's the case often. I know a lot of people that is a motivating factor for them. They experienced it somehow, and that's why they made the decision to get involved with that work. But yeah, I don't know if that's always the case. I think it's an interesting confluence of variables that motivates people to do that kind of. The quote that you said, the work clothes, you got to get your hands dirty. It's an interesting confluence of variables that motivates people to get their hands dirty.
Yeah, talent and I don't know. I guess like you said, different things. Because I deal with kids that are children that are just their parents strippers and I didn't want to get involved with it because you have to it's like you have to get involved with the parents too, and you definitely don't. Well, for myself, speaking for myself, I just felt like I didn't want to talk to I don't want to talk to no strippers. I don't want to talk to no ex-dope people. That's how I felt. So that that kind of made me at first shy away from the children that would come around. But I mean, I had grew up and seeing, so yeah, I just had to try, and it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. But it's a lot of work to be done. But I do think that problems are opportunities with work clothes on. I think if people looked at it like that, like if you have your son was, if your son went to jail. I mean, that's the police out here, man. They entrap youngsters like it's nothing. They entrap them. They act like they're their friends, and then get them to admit that they're in a gang. And then if you're in a gang, it's basically like you're a terrorist. So you have children that's not even in gangs, but for whatever reason, not knowing how to be more careful with their words or whatever, they just say anything. Oh yeah, I'm a part of this gang. I'm a part of that gang. And the officer that's supposed to be their friend puts them in a gang file. So anything that they do, they get caught for anything. They're sentenced, way over the, first offense or whatever. It's like, they're getting 5 years for nothing, just ruining these children's lives, man. It's wild.
That's two of the code words he talked about, gang and terrorist. That was two of them. Yeah, I mean, that's work that should be getting done. Just in general, getting non-white people to be more conscious of the terms that they use, implications of the words that you use, particularly when talking to a white person. And I would think, someone, Shay Abram, listener in Bay Area, Mrs. Abram, she said that Bay Area listeners wanted a program on Oscar Grant, and I'm going to see what I can do. But I didn't wig out over that because, that stuff happens every day. I mean, he wasn't even the only non-white person who was executed by enforcement officials on the day that he was murdered. It happened to another non-white person in a different part of this area of the world that just didn't get as much attention. But I mean, this happens every day. The people that you don't even hear about, you never hear their name. And I mean, you just have to expect that as long as white supremacy exists. So that's why it was terrible what happened to Oscar Grant, but I didn't wig out, quite as much as a lot of other people who this was kind of a shock or they didn't understand why this happened. But yeah, I mean, getting out and informing people, system of white supremacy, enforcement officials are not your friends. They can lie to you. Go to Flex Your Rights. Learn about these guys. Codify how you're going to deal with them so we don't have any more of these Oscar grants, or at least can try to minimize the number of Oscar grants that happen.
They are not your friends. They are your enemies. And these police are coming up to these youngsters, and the parents don't even know that these officers are, in these youngsters' lives, and they're basically just, it's just. That's why what you said was so important. Keep the focus on white people. But it was just important for me to hear that, because I just see these parents and I'm like, what are you doing? You're not doing. What are you? I just like, what are you? I mean, I actually get frustrated about this. Like, what are you doing? But it's the system, man. But it's like, man, these parents are just giving these children up for sacrifice. But it's not them. It's not them. So how do you supposed to look at that? Like, I mean, when you talk about responsibility, or I know he said that whites should be having some type of responsibility. What do you think about when Bill Cosby or somebody comes up with blacks and their responsibility? How do you understand that?
I mean, it's real easy to it's blaming the victim. It's the exact strategy that Mr. Kivel has in his book. It's real easy to point the finger at, particularly a black person and say, all these problems, your neighborhood is messed up, your kid's on crack, you're a prostitute, you're at the strip club, kids in foster care, all these things are, your fault. You won't get yourself together. The system is set up to easily lead you to that conclusion. That's what they're saying all the time anyway. They being racist white supremacists, that, all black people are so messed up because, that's just the way they are. They're born inferior. They're just stupid. It's easy to lead you to that, conclusion. And I just try to expect that. I try to expect that and not get upset about it, and try to make sure I'm not doing it myself, and just to get more people to be more informed about racism, white supremacy, and understand it's a reason that these things happen. I think Umar Abdullah Johnson, he used the term social engineering. Everything about the environment that we're in, the words that we use, the words we don't use, what's on your television, what's on your radio, what's not on your television, what's not on your radio, all of that and more. The food you have to eat is controlled by people who believe in and practice racism. And if you don't understand that, it's going to be real easy to sound like, I was like that. I was saying some of the exact same stuff that Bill Cosby said. I think Mr. Fuller even said that. He said before he had a better understanding of white supremacy that he said, if black people could just get their act together and show up to work on time, and I've heard him say that all this would be corrected. And he said it finally took him to be like, oh, no, wait a minute. That's not what this is about at all. White people just enjoy mistreating us. Oh, okay. But yeah, I try not to get upset at the non-white person, expect it to happen, and just do everything you can to inform more people about white supremacy, so that you'll start seeing, folks coming out sounding like Bill Cosby, except the folks that they're upset with are white people who practice racism.
Yeah, that's right. You almost have to deaden your, like you said, Oscar Grant and stuff. Yeah, you can't get, like you said, you have to expect it. In this system, it's going to be some serious casualties. So, yeah, you have to understand the system, or you'll start, flipping out. That's something I worry about too. That black people are going to end up flipping out and going on their emotions, like they did in the riots or whatever. And I think that's just not productive. That's going to cause even more casualties. But riots and stuff like that. But yeah, you have to expect it. You have to definitely expect it. And I wanted to say, I heard this white term that something brand new. I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's called screwing the pooch.
Yep, I've heard that one.
Bestiality.
Yeah. Sex imperative, that should be August 26th. Dr. Mwalimu K. Baruti should be back for trip number 4 to the cows, and that should be the sex imperative. That should be covered. We'll be back tomorrow. Make sure I get that in. We have about 5 minutes left in the broadcast. We'll be back tomorrow, same, different show time. It'll be 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Not bestiality, but homosexuality. We'll have one of the representatives from the Gay and Lesbian Advocacy Association. Should be a hoot tomorrow on the cows. Oh, and I did want to throw in, since you brought up the dog, I would think this will be my last word you all can share. If dogs were treated the way that black people are treated in the system of white supremacy, white people would have rifles and be in the street. They would not tolerate anyone treating dogs the way black people are treated in the system of white supremacy.
I agree. Yep. They have these dog shows, and they've breeded these dogs into like just genetically terrible situations. They've breeded these dogs into these so-called pedigrees, but they've inbred these dogs so much that these dogs coming out with all kind of genetic defects. White people are crazy about these dogs, man. I don't know. That's they love their dogs. They don't love us.
818 loves her doggy too.
We have a dog culture out here in L.A., mostly pit bulls. Yep.
I think California in general is kind of a real big dog culture.
I was thinking about them dogs, man. As far as breeding, when we were talking about the World Cup and with the buffer group, they've been experimenting with these breeding. They've been, especially in Europe, man. They have all these attack dogs I've never seen before. I mean, they have the Serbian this and the Russian that. So I think this breeding thing and that, I think that carries over in some way with human beings. I really do. I don't know exactly all about it, but they know about breeding and inbreeding and this and that to get what they want. A better smelling dog, a better hearing dog, a dog that does hunting dog, attack dog. Man, could you imagine that? I mean, I can imagine easily that this so-called buffer group this buffer group is their attack dogs in some way, or a snitch dog or whatever. I mean, I think that's probably how they see it.
Mutts. I think that's the term they use. Mutts. I could be incorrect.
It was a good show, Gus, today.
Thank you. Appreciate the support, sir. Hope it's worthy of everyone's time and interest. We should be back tomorrow. White people permitting. We'll be back 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Gay and Lesbian Advocacy Association, C.O.W.S.
That wasn't the last episode of the Boondocks?